To further address the sections above and the struggles ahead, I want us to move back in time. What do we find? We find that the very same Nagel-type problematic not only had been existentially experienced as fundamental, but also had been agonistically confronted and grappled with, beginning almost a century ago. It is therefore imperative for us to understand the kind of far-reaching mutational leap that W.E.B. Du Bois, together with Frantz Fanon, was to initiate. This leap is one that itself could only have been made from the existential ground of the then ex-slave labor Negro-Negra periphery archipelago of the post-1492 New World, a founding politico-stato-mercantilist economic system that had been called for the institution of a hierarchically stratified triadic system, black, enslaved, indentured, conquered, neo-serf, indigenous, white, of labor. With this, as the anthropologist Jacob Pandian documents in his study Anthropology and Western Traditions, the above triadic hierarchy of laborers was itself one whose principle of domination was inextricably interlinked with the no less hierarchically stratified triadic classificatory system of ostensibly differential degrees of being human, of humanness. Degrees of humanness that of course coalesce with the inventions of Man 1 and Man 2 and bring us into focus these black, indigenous enemies of Christ, irrational savages, human others by nature, with post-slave black subject occupying the most subordinated status of nigger/holy other. Yet the West's continued planetary imperializing expansion led to the following paradox. It was only to be in the wake of the West's abolition of Negro-Negra slavery, this itself of course as precipitated by inter alia the earlier success of the Haitian slave revolution, that all peoples of black African descent were made to embody this most subordinated wholly human other status. Modeled on the natural organism, the Western bourgeoisie's liberal monohumanist self-narrating descriptive statement had therefore, as the condition of its post-slavery enactment, logically called for all peoples of black African descent to reoccupy the transumptively inherited Man 1's symbolic death role. Thus, those of black African descent were cast as the naturally deselected native/nigger figure, ostensibly bioevolutionary situated between apes and humans. This is a figure barely evolved and wholly subhuman that is other to the fully evolved, thereby only true human self and its genre-specific mode of symbolic life that is optimally incarnated in the Western bourgeois liberal monohumanist Homo economicus. The former, wholly subhuman, together with its black race, is dysgenically disselected to be racially inferior cum deficient in intelligence, IQ. In symbolic death terms, the latter wholly evolved is, therefore, together with its white race, eugenically selected to be a racially superior proficient in intelligence in symbolic life terms. Furthermore, both premises, together with Man 2's descriptive statement and that of its biocosmogonically chartered code of symbolic life/death, are thereby discursively enacted by the disciplines of the social sciences and the humanities, and therefore a status quo, quote, system of learning, end quote. The ultimate periphery slave/ex-slave archipelago's underside of the Western world system, together with its black African-descended men and women, all generically classified as Negroes and or as colonial natives, has thus been made to function over several centuries as that of the ultimate embodiment of symbolic death, as wholly human others to symbolic life. It is in this context that W.E.B. Du Bois wrote in 1903 from his experience in a then neo-periphery and apartheid U.S. South about his double consciousness. Let's note what he is saying. That to be a professional middle-class American with a doctorate from Harvard, perhaps the first such, Du Bois would have to be anti-Negro. He cannot trust his own normative middle-class American consciousness, structured as it is by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. He is therefore saying, I have to wage war against this consciousness. Yet who knows when I will not let my guard down? Then this consciousness, which is not my own at the same time as it is also my own, will reflexively be in command once more. So the Souls of Black Folk, in which Du Bois published his double consciousness essay Of Our Spiritual Strivings, is itself the first phase of the war against that order of consciousness. This struggle would therefore make apparent to him his reflexly subjective experience of being both positively a middle-class American, and implicitly, therefore, of also being normally fully human, and negatively a Negro, the abnormal human other to his normal middle-class self. He experienced this doubleness in the very terms of his own ostensibly autonomous individual order of consciousness. This was a war that was to be, therefore, an intellectual, imaginative, and sustained political one. Yet in passing, let us also note this. Du Bois is also implying that the governing tape of the world to which he refers, rather than being biologically natural, as it represents itself to be, is instead an epistemological and humanly structured one. This, even though the governing tape has been made to be reflexively and subjectively experienced both by him and by all other Americans, white and Negro, as if it were indeed a bio-instinctually experienced one on the part of each individual. Now, the region of the ex-slave periphery archipelago from which Du Bois was writing at the same time was, as earlier noted, that of the pre-1960s racially segregated apartheid U.S. South. But look at this. A century and a half later, when Frantz Fanon writes of the existential reality from another region of the Western world system's periphery ex-slave archipelago, this time from a then French colonial Martinique, he is saying exactly the same thing. In his Black Skin, White Masks, Fanon is saying by implication that in order to be a middle-class professional as well as a colonial evalué Frenchman, and thereby alone able, in Western terms, to experience himself as fully human, I have to be, at times, reflexively anti-Negro, and therefore opposed to, averse to, my own ostensibly non-evolved self. Now, let us fast forward here a minute to the 60s uprising of the United States. We see Eldridge Cleaver puzzling over another aspect of the same dilemma. Why, he asks, do I find myself, against my will, reflexively desiring white women and reflexively being averse to black women? Then, against our orthodox biocentric conceptual grain, he hits on the concept of the symbolic. What Cleaver asks is the symbol of which white women have been made the incarnation of, and conversely, black women made the absolute embodied negation of. Larry Neal had also noted that his crucial daily struggle was the struggle against the white thing within him, at the same time as all other of-color Americans actively struggle with the same thing reflexively within themselves/ourselves. In the 60s, gays struggling against the no less normative, thereby also opiate-rewarded, quote, heterosexual thing within them had started to come out of the closet as newly minted feminists engaged in consciousness-raising sessions against the normatively canonized as the generic sex, quote, male thing within them. Here I recall one of the more iconic examples of this attempt at climbing out of that normative order of consciousness, as it was to take place in the overall dynamic context of the U.S. 60s uprising. I have, here I cite from memory, sometimes hated myself for being homosexual, the Chicana feminist Rosalie Morales writes. And what's more, Morales continues, I keep a 10-foot pole to keep myself away from black people, end quote. So the enemy to me, she's saying, like Du Bois, Fanon, and Neal before her, is also myself. Are we on the same page here? Because we too are also now struggling to move beyond the knee-jerk limits of the us and the them. To bring this together, let's return to Fanon. Listen to what he's implicitly saying. I can't trust this order of consciousness, its mode of mind, in whose terms I now subjectively experience myself as a colonial middle-class professional evalué Frenchman who is also a Negro. I am now in fief to an order of consciousness whose powerfully induced reflex responses of desire/aversion impel and induce me not only to desire against myself, but also to work against the emancipatory interest of the world's systemic, subordinated, and inferioritized Negro population to which I belong. For these reflex responses of desire/aversion are not my own. They are only mimetically made to be so through my French imperial bourgeois education cum initiation system of French Martinique, and through my colonial history lessons that taught me, exactly like a proper member of the French bourgeoisie, that my ancestors too were the Gauls and not the Franks. This is, of course, because the Gauls have been storied as the origin mythic ancestors by the revolutionary French bourgeoisie over against what had been, pre-revolution, the ancient regime's privileged hereditary storied claim to the Franks and their ruling caste status as noblemen, noble women. Importantly, the above counterclaim regarding the Gauls is emerging in the wake of the French Revolution's declaration of the ostensibly universal, applicable, natural rights of man. So you see, one could further read Fanon as thinking, since my real-life ancestors then were slaves, notres ancestres las esclaves, They were not man/human, nor am I then human myself. Such, quote, rights are therefore neither natural nor universally applicable. With this being so, and given the interests of my present subjectively experienced middle-class order of consciousness and its normative, quote, tape of the world based as it is on such natural rights, do not these laws, rights, everywhere work against me? That is, do not these ostensibly universal laws work against my own now consciously because politically willed self-emancipatory own? It is here that Fanon in 1951, and as a newly qualified psychiatrist, and as such a specific individual and specific intellectual, put forward what is to be an illuminating because transcultural and transcosmogonic comparison. Fanon explains, if I were instead a millennially existing pygmy in Africa, and therefore one still, quote, at the center of my own cultural constellation, its rites and its myths, I could never have subjectively experienced myself negatively as a Negro.